Hi everyone, RFG here with the review for KAKU, Ancient Seal, an open-world action-adventure game with light RPG elements and a good amount of platforming released for PC. It's developed and published by BINGOBELL, with PlayStation and Xbox console releases expected later. Despite the open-world nature that accompanies a lot of games with similar features, KAKU is able to lighten up a lot of the bloat usually associated with the genre. I'll get to that later. The opening cutscene begins with the titular KAKU chasing a piglet in cartoonish fashion. This doesn't end well, and after a brief scolding from the old man Geezer, who you briefly met earlier, you'll soon gain control of KAKU. I'd say this is where the adventure begins, but that's not true. Not yet, anyway. Your set of controls are shown on the left, and are set up with basic intros to jumping, gathering items, and attacking with your main weapon for health damage and arm blade for poise or stun damage. After meeting back up with Geezer, you'll get tutorials for cooking and crafting. Cooking and crafting are very basic here, and I mean that in a positive way. You'll gather ingredients for cooking and ores for crafting in the environment or in chests, and both can be made in pon-pon camps. I'll have more on that in a bit. Cooking is limited to 4 items, 1 for healing, for stamina recovery, for a timed attack buff, and 1 for a timed defense buff. Crafting is limited to creating pellets for your newly received slingshot. The slingshot itself has a default infinite stone pellet, but you need to craft ore for flame, thunder, and poison elements. In general, I didn't find the slingshot all that useful for battle. You can upgrade and add some abilities for it later, but in terms of damage, I found it better to stick into melee attacks. It is still generally useful though. As soon as you're able to use the slingshot, you can use it to gather resources, and it has a surprisingly large range. If you see resources that are a bit out of the way while you're on your way to something else, just use your slingshot on the resources instead and be on your merry way. It is pretty necessary for a lot of puzzles, but also useful for unleashing murderous bees onto your enemies, and there are a lot of beehives scattered throughout. A lot of them. These bees can also attack you, and they hurt a lot. A lot. So many bees. Anyway, after chasing that piglet from earlier for a while, you and Geyser stumble upon a locked gate. He explains about a legend that the being Saga used the elements of wind, fire, water, and earth to create the world, and that currently there are problems forming due to a loss of balance. After a brief forced battle, it's up to you to open the gate and get to the floating island by finding 2 missing elemental stones. After opening the gate, you'll eventually get to the tutorial for the upgrade system. Here's where the RPG elements kick in. KAKU can upgrade 4 of his basic stats: weapon, arm blade, and slingshot attacks, and defense. Each requires a number of sacred stones and a specific divine gem for each stat to upgrade for an increase in level for up to 6 levels. Remember those abilities I said you can add for the slingshot? Not only can KAKU get new abilities for the slingshot, but for his main weapons and arm blades as well. The base versions of new weapon abilities will also use sacred stones, but some abilities can gain alternate attributes after a number of uses. Moving further, and after a boss fight with the stone giant, it'll transport you to the floating island, a central area surrounded by 4 large elemental continents. You'll be granted Awakening mode, which gives you a limited set of attacks, longer melee attack range, and higher stats. Awakening mode meter is beneath the health and stamina meters on the top left of the screen. You're then joined by Piggy, the piglet you were chasing earlier, and given the use of new abilities from them. Spatial teleportation transports you to the Ruins realm, where you'll find the Star Altar. This is the main area for you to upgrade KAKU's stats, weapon abilities, cooked items, and elemental pellets capacities. There are also a good amount of challenge rooms to undergo here that will lead to health and stamina increases, and depending on the room, additional treasure. You'll need Ruins keys to enter each room, which you'll find while exploring the 4 elemental continents. Ripple Stride, which lets you move across deep water. Power Leap lets you quickly jump across really long distances. And finally, Piggy Disguise lets you enter pon-pon areas without alerting the pon-pon people. As I mentioned earlier, the loss of balance in the world has caused the pon-pon people to become hostile. By using Piggy Disguise, you can enter pon-pon camps to find treasure, use their pots for cooking, their tables for crafting, and even speak to them, where some of which will have quests. After leaving the Ruins realm for the first time, the Stone Giant gives you a brief explanation about runestones and equipment slots. Unlike many other games with RPG features, equipment and runestones in KAKU don't have base stats. Instead, they both contain attributes that augment KAKU's stats or add their own attributes. Equipment varies with their own attributes and number of slots for runestones, and you'll be able to acquire many of both in various ways. That's about it for the typical RPG elements. Sacred stones, along with the other items necessary for upgrades or cooking and crafting, can be earned by simply exploring and completing quests. This made exploration in KAKU Ancient Seal an enjoyable experience for me. Depending on the situation, I could decide if something was worth exploring at the particular moment or could wait for a return later. But I was still able to add to my resources without going out of my way or devoting time strictly to grinding or farming. After all of this, Kaku's adventure really begins. The Stone Giant informs Kaku of his destiny to stop an incoming disaster by restoring balance to the souls hidden in temples within the 4 elemental continents by bringing them to the floating island. The game is really open, and you're able to fast travel back to the island pretty freely. If you want to travel to a specific location within one of the continents, you'll have to activate a crystal tower. Crystal towers are activated by completing slide puzzles, and while that may sound simple, I gotta give kudos to the slide puzzle designers because it couldn't have been easy to come up with a number of them in this game. They're also generally well spread out in the map. The game's draw distance is also handled so that you can see the beam of blue light of crystal towers and the red beam of light of ruin keys a good amount away from them within a given area. Each continent is separated by areas, and new areas are introduced by each continent's individual stories. The temples and ruins also share some of the same individuality, although I found they tend to focus a lot more on general platforming and timing, while the other areas focus more on exploration. Combat isn't to be taken lightly either. Your equipment, runestones, and abilities can make a large difference on how to handle each situation. What may be good for a general mob fight might not work for a one-on-one boss battle, and in certain situations you won't be able to swap out your equipment. And some of the more expensive abilities, like counter and ultimate attacks, can lead to high damage while giving you invulnerability frames. While some of the later areas' enemies and bosses can be tough, the same can apply for platforming. I wouldn't say the game ever requires extremely tight precision for controls or timing, but there are times where trial and error are probably your best bet to get through an area. While that sounds rough on paper, the game is forgiving. Ancient Seal autosaves often, and in most cases checkpoints are very lenient. None of the continents or ruins felt more or less forgiving than the others, and individually I think you can start from any one and move forward in the same time frame. While there is the overall story arc, the stories within the continents are roughly self-contained, though Kaku will keep it on track with the search for the temples. Those self-contained stories did have their moments though. Graphics have their moments too, often I'd say. The environments look really good, and a lot of the times the character animations are excellent. Unfortunately, I did run into some noticeable frame rate issues in both the ruins and the temples, although the game was running fine for the most part in outside areas. The soundtrack is pretty solid and fits in with the rest of the game. There's a good mix of whimsy, mysticism, and fast-paced music to explore and battle in. The voice acting fits in nicely too. It may mostly be gibberish, but it's cute gibberish that fits the aesthetic really well. KAKU Ancient Seal may have a lot in common with other games in the open world genre, but it also does a good job of trimming the fat and relieves some of the tediousness of its counterparts. The use of a central area instead of an all-around overworld does a lot to keep the game moving at a steady pace with rare lulls, and the Ruins realm lets you take a break from exploration if you feel the need to do so. If you're the type to explore relentlessly, you'll find there's a lot to look out for. Crystal towers, ruin keys, and item chests all have a progress tracker per continent on the map screen. There are also golden monsters and fragments that Blink Seal to find for completionists that aren't tracked on the map screen. Although I had some issues with frame rate, I still think KAKU Ancient Seal is a great title for fans of the genre. I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Let me know what you think below. Thanks. Bye.